Snow fell like ash from a quiet sky, drifting in pale spirals that seemed to hush the world into reverence. A lone figure moved along the ridge, his breath rising in plumes that clung to the air before vanishing. Jonah McGraw's steps pressed deep into the whitened earth, leaving a trail that would soon be swallowed by the storm. The mountain had shaped him into something both man and myth, the kind of soul children pointed at in whispers when he came into town, the kind of shadow that lived longer than its owner. He carried no companion but the wind, no words but the ones he murmured into the night. "The night will echo your voice," he whispered, his voice low, roughened by years of silence. "As you bear the breath of my legacy." The words disappeared into the white wilderness, a vow, a memory, or maybe just a plea he no longer understood. In the valley below, smoke curled from a small cabin chimney. Within its walls, Miriam Ashford sat near the fire with her boy curled against her lap. Samuel, 9 years old, slept with the kind of innocence the world had not yet stolen, though the world had already stolen much from her. She brushed a strand of his hair back from his forehead, her fingers trembling. The fire's glow caught her face, showing shadows beneath her eyes, lines carved by grief too young. Widowhood had not been gentle. The town did not let her forget it. Ruth Bennett's words still stung, "A woman alone is a wound waiting to fester." Even when they spoke it softer, Miriam heard it louder. She had stood in the market only yesterday, clutching a basket of potatoes while Ruth and the other women shared glances sharp as needles. She had gone home with a spine that hurt from holding itself too straight, her son's hand pressed in hers like a secret lifeline. The snow beat against her window now, rattling the glass with a steady persistence. She whispered to herself, "We'll be all right," though even Samuel, half asleep, had learned not to believe everything spoken aloud. Her hands were cracked from chopping wood and boiling water, her shoulders raw from hauling buckets, yet her dignity she held with a stubbornness almost holy. Jonah entered the town the next morning, the sound of his boots crunching over snow stirring heads to turn. He tied his horse at the post near the mercantile, his broad shoulders bent against the cold. Children stared before their mothers tugged them close. Deputy Amos Carter watched from the porch of his office, one hand near the iron at his hip. Jonah walked slow, as though each step carried weight not visible to others. The scar along his jaw caught the morning light, a pale reminder of some old story no one dared ask. Inside, the warmth of the store did little to soften the stares. Jonah said little, his voice more gravel than tone when he asked for salt, flour, a length of rope. The silence he carried into a room often felt louder than speech. Behind him, whispers fluttered. "Wild man from the hills. Lives like a wolf, I heard. Best keep children inside." Miriam entered as he turned to leave, her arms straining beneath the heft of a flour sack. She faltered, her boots slipping slightly on the wooden floor. Without a word, Jonah stepped forward and caught the weight, lifting the sack as though it were no burden at all. Their eyes met only briefly, hers startled and guarded, his lowered and unreadable. He carried it outside to her wagon and set it down without asking. "Thank you," Miriam said, her voice measured, wary of ears that were already pricked. Jonah nodded once, no more, and stepped back. Samuel peeked out from the wagon, his small face lit with curiosity rather than fear. The boy saw something his mother could not yet, not danger but gentleness roughened by time. Behind them, Ruth Bennett's voice pierced the air like a needle. "Look at her letting a stranger handle her things. No shame at all." The words burned, but Miriam held her chin steady, gathered her son close, and guided the wagon forward. Jonah watched her go, then turned away, his figure blending with the stillness of the trees at the edge of town. That night, Miriam walked the long mile home, the flour safe in her wagon but her spirit heavy with the weight of whispers. The snow deepened, crunching beneath each step, pressing against her skirts. Samuel leaned against her shoulder, half dozing. She thought of how quickly kindness was twisted into sin under another's tongue. She thought of Jonah McGraw's silence, how it had felt more like respect than avoidance. Still, the gossip would not forgive her for being seen near him. Beyond the lights of town, Jonah built his fire. Sparks leapt into the night, swallowed by snow as soon as they were born. He sat with his back against a tree, the cold gnawing at his bones but familiar as an old companion. In the flames he saw not warmth but memory, a woman's voice long gone, a promise he had once made to someone he could never return to. His hand brushed over the scar on his jaw, an absent gesture. Inside the cabin, Miriam stirred broth for her son. The walls creaked beneath the storm, snow piling high against the window. Samuel asked, "Mama, why don't they like us?" His voice was small, uncertain. like a bird not yet brave enough to fly. Miriam froze, spoon in hand. The truth pressed at her throat. Because they fear what they do not understand. Because a woman without a husband is a reminder of how fragile their own homes are. Because kindness is mistaken for weakness. But she only said, "Some folks don't know how to see people right." Samuel nodded as though he understood, though she knew the wound would settle somewhere inside him, growing with years. She kissed the top of his head, tasting the salt of her own tears she would not let him see. The storm sang outside, long low notes across the timber, carrying voices that belonged to neither man nor woman but to the wilderness itself. And somewhere in that night, Jonah lifted his face to the sky and whispered again, softer this time as though to someone listening just beyond the snow, "The night will echo your voice." The days folded into one another, snow settling deeper, pressing the world into silence. Miriam felt it in her bones, the kind of stillness that sharpened loneliness into ache. Yet in that quiet she began to notice small signs that someone else walked their path. A neat stack of kindling would appear at her doorstep, left before dawn. Would already split, the work of a strong hand. The boy's mittens, left too close to the fire, replaced silently with another pair. Jonah McGraw left no words, no claim, only the offerings of a man who knew survival was sometimes built from small mercies. Samuel, wide-eyed, discovered him first. He lingered near the edge of the trees, where Jonah's camp smoke curled into the sky. One afternoon, Samuel followed the trail of prints and found the mountain man crouched low, pointing at the snow. "Rabbit," Jonah said, his voice low, steady. He traced the tiny indentations with a finger, then lifted his eyes to the boy. Samuel nodded, absorbing each detail, his breath puffing in clouds of awe. That evening, Miriam found her son at the table, drawing little paw prints into the frost of the window. When she asked, Samuel said, "He taught me what to look for." "He doesn't talk much, Mama, but he sees everything." Miriam's heart tightened with both fear and something softer. She should have told Samuel to stay away, warned him that nothing good came from gossip's target. But she had seen the boy's face, lit not by fear but by wonder, and she let silence be her answer. Word traveled faster than footsteps in a small town. Ruth Bennett stood at the counter of the inn, her voice sharp as kindling snapping. "Mark my words, that widow's inviting shame right into her home. First a stranger helps her at the store, now her boy trails after him like a pup. It isn't decent." Others leaned close, feeding the flame. Deputy Amos Carter listened, arms folded, jaw tight. He wanted to believe better of Miriam, but gossip weighed heavy when repeated too often. He rode out one morning, finding Jonah at the treeline, axe in hand. "You do well to leave her be," Amos said, his tone half warning, half plea. "She's got enough to bear without your shadow darkening her door." Jonah paused, sweat steaming off his brow, then sank the axe deep into the log before him. His eyes held steady on Amos, but no reply came. Silence was his answer as ever. Amos shifted in his saddle, unsettled, then turned back toward town. That night Miriam found Jonah at her door, his shoulders dusted with snow. "Don't come here again," she said softly, though the words cost her breath. "For my sake, for Samuel's. They'll tear us apart with their mouths." Jonah said nothing. He only nodded, a shadow crossing his scarred face. Then he turned, footsteps swallowed by the storm, leaving her standing in the doorway with her chest aching in ways she did not wish to name. The blizzard came soon after, sudden and merciless, driving snow across the valley with a howl like wolves circling prey. The cabin groaned under the weight, the fire hissed and spat as if protesting. Miriam barred the door, holding Samuel close, whispering comfort she did not feel. By morning, the storm had buried fences and paths, leaving only a white wasteland where the world had been. Samuel slipped from her arms when she dozed, restless with a child's courage that does not know fear. He wanted to find Jonah to see if he too was swallowed by the storm. By the time Miriam woke, his tracks already wound away from the cabin, a thin trail vanishing into the white. Her heart cracked open at the sight. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stumbled into the snow, calling his name until her voice burned. The storm answered with silence, only the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. She knocked at neighbors' doors, begged for help, but they shook their heads. "The boy wandered where he shouldn't," one muttered. "It's not our place." Alone, she staggered into the storm, each step heavier than the last. The snow clutched at her skirts, bit into her skin. Her voice tore raw against the wind. "Samuel." She fell once, rose again, the world spinning in white. Jonah heard her voice before he saw her. He moved through the storm like a creature born of it, shoulders bent, eyes scanning the ground. He found Samuel huddled against a fallen log, cheeks red with cold, breath shallow. The boy's hands clutched a branch as though it were anchor enough to hold him to the earth. Jonah knelt, lifted the child into his arms and pulled him close beneath his coat. "Hush now," he murmured, voice rough but steady. "The night will echo your voice, boy. You'll carry the breath of those who came before you. But first we'll get you home." Through the storm he carried him, each step a battle against the snow's pull. The wind clawed at his face, but he pressed forward, Samuel's head tucked against his chest. At last the cabin's outline appeared through the blur, and Miriam's cry rose from the doorway. She ran to them, falling to her knees as Jonah lowered the boy into her arms. Her tears froze on her cheeks as she kissed Samuel's face, feeling the faint warmth of his breath. "You brought him back," she whispered, her words breaking. Jonah's eyes softened for the briefest moment before he turned his gaze away. Deputy Amos stood nearby, drawn by the sound of her cries. He saw Jonah bent against the snow, breath ragged, and something in his certainty faltered. Gossip could spin lies, but this was truth standing in front of him. A man who had risked his life not for pride, but for a child who wasn't his. Amos lowered his eyes, shame stirring in his chest. In the days that followed, the storm passed, leaving a fragile hush across the valley. The gossip that once cut Miriam's spirit softened, though some tongues still wagged. Others, however, had seen Jonah's act, and they spoke of it with grudging respect. Ruth Bennett's words carried less sting when her husband muttered, "If that man hadn't gone, the boy would be gone too." Miriam stood taller, her shame easing into something steadier. She carried water from the well without lowering her eyes, faced the market with quiet resolve. Jonah began to pack his things, tying his horse with the intent to ride into the mountains again. Trouble followed him, and he believed his leaving would leave them freer. But Miriam came to him in the stillness of dusk, Samuel at her side. Her voice trembled, yet not from fear. "You don't need to go," she said. "Not as a savior. Just as someone who stays." Jonah's eyes searched hers, weary, scarred, uncertain. He did not answer with words. He bent slightly, extended his hand toward Samuel. The boy took it without hesitation, his small fingers gripping the callous strength of Jonah's palm. In that gesture, more was spoken than any vow could hold. Snow began to melt in the weeks that followed, dripping from branches, softening the land back into earth. Crocuses pushed timid heads through thawing ground, and the river broke free of its ice with a roar. The world renewed itself, as if reminding those who lived upon it that even the harshest winters end. And so the story closes, dear listener, not with thunder but with the quiet strike of flint in the dark. Love, you see, is often mistaken for grand words, but more often it is the silent presence of a hand that does not let go, the breath shared in a storm, the fire kept alive when winds would rather snuff it out. Dignity is not gifted by the crowd, nor stolen by their whispers. It is reclaimed in moments when one soul dares to see another fully, and chooses not to look away. If you carry anything from this tale, let it be this. When the night grows long and the snow presses heavy, remember that warmth is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet echo of a voice in the storm, reminding you that you are not alone.